Thank you.
Hello, 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 and welcome everyone to Breaking the Digital Divide to shape the next C-suite. Let us begin by finding out who's here. So go ahead in the chat. Let us know who is in the room. And where are you joining us from? I am normally from Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. Today, I bring you greetings from the city of brotherly love. So I may mute several times as you hear sirens go by. Please be patient. All right, so we have Maryland, a lot of Brooklyn. I see California, Riley is here. Newport News. Ben Zara, yell out some that I'm missing. Boston Burbs, wonderful.
Kansas City, Raleigh, Oxnard, California, great.
All right, we are across the map.
Brooklyn, second best borough. I'll tell you what, Those
are fighting words, Ben.
Okay. I'll see you at the East River. We'll handle it there.
Happy to meet you there.
Okay.
Oh, we have greetings from Argentina. Welcome.
Fantastic.
We love it. Dallas is here.
Johnson City, the Empire State, great. Northern Virginia, Torino, we're just a few miles away from you here in Bethesda today.
I love it. I love it. We have Lexington, Kentucky. We'll give people about one more minute.
Azure, we have a very special guest who popped in to my surprise.
Oh, please do tell.
My upline. If we were in Amway, this would be an upline with my mom.
Woohoo!
So this is I was a career advisor and coach. So this is a family tradition as a business. So she's joining us today. So hi, Sue.
Love it. Hello. Welcome. We are so happy that you are here. Okay. All right. So we've had an opportunity to see where everyone is joining us from all over the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you find yourself. We are so happy that you are here. My name is Azure Roots, and I will serve as your host today. We have an amazing team. Taylor is our producer. As we move forward, I'm going to turn it over to Taylor to give us some housekeeping. Taylor.
I love it. Hello, everyone. I'm Taylor Cabre. I'm thrilled to be your tech host today. We love for these webinars to be really, really interactive. So the chat feature is going to be our best friend. We're already using it. We've got some folks from planet Earth greeting us here. We're going to keep up that interaction, that engagement, that energy throughout the chat. One of our pilot values is vibrancy. So we want to see that vibrancy throughout this whole webinar. You can +1 what folks are saying. If you want to add in your comments or your thoughts or your questions, you can give a little +1. You can do an @sign. So let's practice that right now. Go ahead and do a +1 and then @Ben or @Azure or @Zara or @me. Personally, if you think Brooklyn is, the #1 borough, go ahead and +1 and @Zara. Let's do that.
I mean, y'all are assuming, your biases are assuming it was Manhattan. Could have been Queens, okay?
No, that's not true at all.
Oh, Queens hater. Okay. All right. We get the Staten Island folks together. We're going to really get to you. So
listen. There's just no comparison, really, is what it comes down to. So.
Agreed. All right. Thanks, y'all, for the vibrancy in the chat. We're going to keep up that. Ooh, I got a +1. Thank you, Kimberly. We're going to keep up that interaction here and that engagement with some polls. So I'm going to launch our first poll here. And the first question is, how would you describe your employee development programs? Be super honest with us. The poll has now launched. We're getting the answers. And Ben and Azure and Zara, can you see the polls as they come in?
We can. We have 15 out of our 41. So let's get those answers going. We're halfway there, good people.
vote early, vote often. you know? Gives us some good
right.
data.
60%, we're climbing.
All right.
And then
Closer, we're almost at 75%.
And if you're in the chat, there's a drop down and it might say host and panelists. You're going to change it to everyone. So that way everyone can see what you have to say. Everyone's voice is heard, equal playing field. We keep it open. A lot of webinars, they have it closed. We're going to keep it open because we want everyone to have a voice here.
Yes.
Absolutely. We want to hear from you. We're 80% there. Let's take about 10 more seconds
Okay.
for the last few people to get their votes in. How would you describe your employee development program? In 5 seconds, we'll close it and share. And I like it, Taylor.
All right.
Let's go
let's
ahead.
do it. Polls ended. Let's share these results. Can everyone see those on their screen? All
Yes.
right.
All right, so
Go ahead.
Ugh.
Sorry, Gotcha.
no, go ahead, Taylor, jump in.
All right, we've got 40% say they're slowly growing. All right, 20% non-existent. 23% we're trying, and with an exclamation point, we're trying. I feel it. 17% say robust program with multiple components. All right, snaps for you there. Ben, Zara, anything you want to comment on this piece here? Are we good to keep going?
McKinsey had some data that came out this summer that the number one reason people quit their jobs was lack of growth opportunities. They thought they were at a dead end at their current employer. So, there's a wide spectrum, but it seems like a majority of this audience, there's more room, right, to grow. And, and I'd probably mark even at pilot, we're slowly growing, right? We're probably in that category. So you're in good company if you've got work to do, but it's a really important thing. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. You thought we were done with the polls. We've got one more for you here. We're going to launch another one right now. What are the biggest challenges you face with employee development? So poll has launched. We'd love for everyone to participate.
And this will help Zara and I, guide some of our comments too about what's maybe getting in the way around this digital divide we'll talk about between managers and employees.
Mm-hmm. And if you've got more you want to add in, you can throw something else in the chat too. Let us know what you're thinking. All right, we got 45% participate. That's much faster this time.
Okay, we're warmed up, that first one.
All right, answers streaming in. Who's
Dana put in the chat, people are too busy to attend trainings. That's, Dana, I've seen that a lot, right? Where, employees and engagers say, I want training, and you offer it, and then they're like, I don't got time for this. And so that's got to be frustrating.
Yeah. Stacy says, our company is small and not everyone can be a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Susie said leadership buy-in. That's important as well.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, all right. We got 67% participated. Maybe 10 more seconds, Azure, till get some more.
Let's do it, because we have a number of people who are also adding theirs in the chat. So we're getting a lot of engagement.
All right. Employees. Sarah says, not all trainings are available to all employees. Limited seats require us, require us to limit who can participate in certain classes. All right. Alan says, embedding it into the culture, not a nice to have, a want to have. Mm-hmm. Love that. And then Ashley, I think we're trying to do things that worked in the 1990s, but we don't have the agility to change the organization enough to employ newer methodologies. So you can touch on that as well. All right, folks, I'm going to give it 5 more seconds till I close the poll. Then you won't hear from me till the very end, sadly, but you will happily hear from Zara and Ben and Azure. Sorry, yes, for the rest of the time. All right, ending the poll here. Let's look at our results. We've got 28% say advancement within the company is difficult. I think we touched on that in the chat. 25% say it's hard to plan content that is applicable to everyone. Very true. 19% say other, which we've got all those answers in the chat there. 16% say program is hard to scale. Then we've got can't get budget approved and missing a virtual component. Zara and Ben, anything you want to add to this piece here?
Can you put it up so everyone can see it?
Oh, sorry, folks. Here we go.
I'm a visual learner, so if I don't see it, I got nothing.
Yeah, I'll just chime in here and say that everyone, I mean, we're going to talk about this later, right? But there's always going to be challenges. It's how do we really navigate them? But we really need to know our people to know how to navigate them. So we're going to talk a lot about that later. But I'm not surprised. Like everything that I see in the chat and these options, like these are things that we see often. So as Ben mentioned earlier, we are all in good company here, and we're going to continue talking about these and figuring out how we really navigate these.
Love it. All right, anything else before we pass it back to Azure? Sounds good. All right, let's get going.
Wonderful. And we are ready to jump in. I would like to take this moment to introduce you to Zara. I'm going to save my dying question until the end, but Zara prides herself on being a passionate disruptor. She is an experienced change maker. She uses holistic approaches. She has an extensive background in human resources, and I have to know about these donuts. Okay, how many donuts can you do in a day? That's what I want to know.
Listen, don't challenge me now, okay? But I do have to say, I love donuts. And I love Brooklyn. For those who joined late, I live in Brooklyn. I'm definitely diehard New Yorker, and Brooklyn is the best borough, Ben, just FYI. But yes, so as my bio kind of outlines, I focus heavily on DEIB work, but we know that that looks like a lot of different things, right? And it's really looking at employee experience and across the board at all of these different pieces. And I very much utilize an empathetic and holistic approach, but I'm also very detailed oriented, and I also come from an operations background. So I'm also, you know, focusing on the details of things to really make sure that processes and systems are as effective and impactful as they can be, while also looking at that more holistic, larger picture. And I am always eating donuts, Azure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to have you. I'm so excited about all of your wisdom and insight that you will get to share on today. Everyone, please welcome in the chat Ms. Zara. Put a +1. Let's show her some love. Give her some fire. Yes, we are excited. I love it. I love it. Thanks for sharing the love. As we move forward, please let me take a moment to introduce you to Ben. Ben Brooks is the founder and CEO of Pilot, one of HR's top tech influencers. Big, big, big darn deal. He has held many leadership and management roles. Lockheed Martin, you name it, he's done it. And he's a co-founder of the LGBT Employee Resource Group at his management consulting firm. The greatest thing I love about Ben today is his mom's here. So shout out to mom, but shout out to Ben. So Ben, over to you. What do you want us to know?
Well, I think I love what Zara talked about, getting into the details, because I talked to someone recently who said that transformation is 99% logistics. I love that quote, that so much of it is about kind of getting into those details. And, you know, I founded Pilot with my life savings with this idea that everyone could feel powerful at work. And just so many people I know, you have a bad day at work and then you have a bad day in the rest of your life. And we spend so much of our time at work, and there's so much more each one of us can do to make our jobs more flexible, more satisfying, more challenging, more, you know, stress-free, et cetera. So just thrilled to have you here. Shout out to Janine Dooley, one of our great customers, is on today from Diageo, and some others here as well today. So Jeff, Nadine, others, thanks for being here, and Azure and Taylor, thanks for kicking us off.
Love it. Thanks so much, Ben and Zara. I'm so excited about this topic. I know you're going to leave us with a wealth of resources on how to help managers lead more authentically and thoughtfully. As we move forward, let's jump right into our very first question. So here we are. How have expectations changed for managers and leadership? Zara, I want to start with you. Give me your point of view.
Yeah, I love this question. Also, because I think a lot of times when, especially in like DEIB work, we don't talk about like the importance of managers, right? And the influence that they really have on an employee's experience, right? So I think it's really important to also talk about how expectations have changed, especially in this like more hybrid and remote environment. So I love this question. So I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that the entire environment and experience has changed, right? I think for some companies that may have been remote fully before the pandemic, like not much may have changed there, but the reality is a lot of companies were not, right? And so now we have more hybrid and remote environments, which also means that how managers show up has had to change as well, right? To kind of accommodate the changes that are happening in the environment. Now, the thing is with COVID, it really and the pandemic in general, it really forced people to reset what they're willing to put up with in the workplace, right? Gone are the days where managers and companies really demand that you leave parts of yourself at the door when you show up to work, right? Or they're not focusing on employee growth or support. And the reality is people now are recognizing that I don't have to settle for that, right? And people are now really seeking workplaces that prioritize and value them. They're also seeking that from their manager, right? Because we know a manager of someone has a direct impact on what that person's experience is at a company. So there's also a lot more talk happening about DEIB, right? So this is another way that managers, this expectation has changed for them, where now we're talking about bringing my whole self, right? My authentic self. And for a lot of managers where maybe these conversations were not happening before, right? It's resulted in them having to quickly learn, what does this mean? What does it entail? What are the definitions? What's the terminology, right? What are the conversations happening around this? And how can I support my employees in holistic ways that maybe I wasn't doing before, right? And then the other thing also here is there are very real things happening in the world that are impacting people, right? Like their mental health. And we no longer can say, oh, again, you're leaving that at the door, right? Like that shouldn't be impacting your work. We know that it's going to impact work, right? And so again, really relying on managers to understand that and be able to support their folks as things are happening like outside of work, right? And then the final thing that I'll also say is that management remotely looks completely different, right? And so again, you can't really micromanage virtually, right? So even though some managers and companies are clearly still trying, right? Those are the same places where turnover is really high. So again, we don't want micromanagement, but for some folks, they've had to really relearn what their management style is. So again, employees are not really, willing to tolerate that anymore. So managers have also had to adjust their management style. So I know that was a lot, but I had a lot of thoughts on this one, but I will kick it back over to the group.
Ben, what about you?
Well, I'll just point everyone to the chat. We'd encourage everyone to answer this question in the chat. What are your perspectives? Part of a virtual environment allows us to connect and have more voices in the room talk. So that's, I know, something that Zara and I are both really committed to, is learning from everyone. And so there's some great conversation and questions that came up. There was what's the B in DEIB? Great question. Belonging, right? And Dana asked that and did the heavy lifting for a ton of other people by asking that question. So, I think, plus one, everything Zara said, one of the biggest changes is people's comfort zones. Oftentimes we talk about performance management, but really it's proximity management. That if we're close physically to someone, if we can see them, if you put a plus one, and if you ever heard the kind of butts in seats, is that a term that's ever in your organization? Some of your executives talk about butts in seats, or AIC, I heard it once. And so it's these idea that I feel comfortable because I can see my employees and I know that they're working, or I know that we're on the same page, or I know that they're bought in. And that's what people got used to. But in reality, it was just a bias around proximity. We actually had less control or influence, even though they were close. So part of it, right, that's changed is managers and leaders feel a little out of control. Some of the demand to come back to the office and that power struggle is that. And to Zara's point, that labor has the leverage. The employees have more leverage now, and they've voted with their feet in many organizations when it's not a compelling experience, when they're not treated well, when the culture doesn't, celebrate who they are, when they're not set up for success. And so in a lot of ways, this is, I think, a useful, if painful, trend, because it's having to up the bar for everyone, including employees, because we'll talk more about that later. It's actually harder for employees. Most of employees love not commuting, right? Or wearing yoga pants at home on a Zoom call. That's great. But the bar to be successful as an employee when you work remote or hybrid is actually higher And so the expectations have gone up across the board, but there's also trade-offs, right? We're not having to find parking downtown or spend, commuting and, paying all the dry cleaning bills, all that. We can spend more time with our families and our pets. So that's how I see it, Azure.
Love it. Ben, that's it. It's important to see our employees, right? Everyone wants to be seen, whether in person or via Zoom. See me. I love it. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben and Zara. Let's go on to the next question. Here we are. What are the best ways that managers can ensure high potentials thrive in their own situations? Zara, what have you done? Give us your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for this. And so thank you to the person that asked what B in belong and the DEIB means. It means belonging, but we've also seen a lot of other sort of acronyms, right? We see A for access, sometimes we see J for justice. So this work has a lot of different acronyms. So I appreciate someone clarifying that. But the number one rule in this work is don't assume, right? You want to make sure that you're gathering the appropriate data that can really ensure that you are fully informed, right? Before we even talk about what are best ways, you have to start with having a conversation, right? You have to actually create spaces where your employees can directly share what they want and how they best thrive, because it's not going to look the same for everyone, right? And so we also want to make sure that we're building a clear growth plan for all employees, right? Including your high potential folks. Too often companies have like sort of a vaguely defined program, right, that relies heavily on people having to advocate for themselves, right? You want to really shift that responsibility away from the employees to be led by their manager. So that's definitely something that you want to be thinking about. And again, back to that piece around communication, you want to have proactive, clear communication, right? You don't want to wait until someone is frustrated or burnt out before you're thinking about how to support them, right? So that's where that proactive communication piece comes in. And then back to what I was saying before, though, not everyone wants the same thing and isn't going to need the same thing in the environment to really grow, right? So a big mistake that a lot of managers make is they're not personalizing how they manage or support their folks, right? Management can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. People want to, as we've been saying, people want to be seen and valued, right? They want to make sure that all of their background and experiences and creativity and innovation, all these different pieces are really seen and valued, right? It's our differences that really allow us to be even stronger, which means that the management of individuals will also need to look different per person. And then the final piece that I'll really say here is, I think a lot of times when we're focusing on development, sometimes it can feel very heavy, right? And it can feel like we're constantly giving critical feedback or constructive feedback, but appreciation and celebration goes a long way, right? And so does monetary compensation. Right. And so I think we want to be, real about it. We want to be mindful that we want to definitely celebrate folks. We also want to revisit like what can be done, right, monetarily to really appreciate those individuals that are going above and beyond, right? Whether that's increasing their salary, giving them a bonus without waiting for them to have to advocate for themselves. So that's something else to really think about, because there are a lot of studies and statistics that show that people from underrepresented backgrounds, they run a higher risk when they're asking for more money within the workplace, right? Biases show up there as well. And so we want to just make sure that it's not on employees to kind of advocate for themselves, right? You'll hear me say that a lot throughout today's session. So we want to make sure that we really are creating a more holistic, inclusive workplace, which means we have to really address challenges head on. And we have to make sure that every employee feels valued and seen, but also that they see themselves in the company long term, right? We want people to stay. We want that retention to stay high. So those are just a few of my thoughts, but I'll kick it back over to you, Azure.
Yes. So my takeaways: don't assume, have the conversation, and pay attention. I love that. Key takeaways. Ben, let me throw this over to you. What is your perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting, Zara. I'm thinking about the self-advocate piece because we have a different point of view on that at Pilot. I think that's actually a way to level the playing field, because people, if they grow up in different situations, don't even know that they can advocate for themselves, right, or that they should. And I totally agree that bias can show up in the process of them doing that. Mm-hmm. So, but we certainly don't want to make it in such that people are in such a desperate situation that they have to claw themselves to get the basic needs and to be set up for success. But I think part of what managers can do to help with high potentials is to encourage them to ask for what they want or what they need. If they're bored, ask for more challenge. if they're feeling isolated, ask for, the ability to go travel to see some teammates. If they're unclear about expectation, right, to like, that's a part of, you can't read minds in any relationship. And so it's important that we teach people to give voice to what they want or what they need. And that we as managers then work on that, follow through, right? Don't just explain why we can't do it, but figure out what we can do. I think a lot of it is also to pay attention. There's a tendency sort of like the medical analogy, right, is the doctor would focus on the sickest patient. And the high potentials are the healthy ones, right? So we sort of ignore them. We focus on our lowest performers. And then sometimes the best way to show high potential, sometimes they think, oh, they're doing great. I don't want to bother them. But if you ignore them, they don't feel important. So that attention, right, is quality time and attention and being seen is important. And sometimes we should spend a little bit less time on people that are our lower performers and more time on the higher performers, the higher potentials, and really to talk to them about what they want, about their future, about their dreams, their goals. So as Zara said, that they see that they have a longer future at the organization. So I think that's a big part of it is just, if you think of sunshine, you want to have the employee, the high potential, feel like they're in the sun, right? They feel the warmth. They feel that they can't ignore that they are clearly someone that is valued and that the organization, is interested in where they want to shape their career and where they want to take it.
Ben, that is a big darn deal. I have never heard anyone say, ensure that your employees feel the warmth and the value. That's a stick and stay.
Mm-hmm.
People will advocate when they know that they have a place and that their place in the organization matters. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
And there's things, obviously, you don't want, to have pay inequity and force people to grovel to get to a level that they should be. That the organization should systemically look at that and analyze that, et cetera. But for the high potentials, thinking about once there's a level playing field, and those things, what do they want to do? Invite the conversation. You imagine if you interview an external candidate for a job and you're a manager, you'll talk about, well, what are your career goals? Where do you want to go? Why aren't we talking to our own frickin' people in the same way that we're talking to a stranger in a recruiting process? Why aren't we having the same conversations with the people where they already are? And there's a lot of things that get in the way of that.
Absolutely. Zara?
I just wanted to chime in because I think Ashley, like what you said is really like the crux of a lot of the DEIB work that I do, right? And it's about, we want to create opportunities for people to be able to step up, but some folks, or to move up, I should say, but for some folks, they don't know how to do that, right? And that's where that cultural competency comes in. That's where we're trying to bridge that cross-cultural understanding. So that's a big part of being a manager as well, right? Is offering the opportunity, but also how do you coach people to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, right? And how do you create those spaces where people do feel, safety looks different for everyone. So what does safety look like for you? How can I cultivate that? How can I build trust? Like these are all conversations that managers need to be focusing on. So again, it comes down to the employee development side, but there's so much that like informs that, and how an employee feels that they can develop in an organization. So thank you for bringing that point up. It's very important in this conversation. So I just really wanted to like highlight that for a second.
Yeah, I wanted to pull out Alan. Everyone has potential, capacity, capability, right? Having candid dialogues around performance, potential, readiness, and willingness. All of those things allow employees to feel seen. I'm here, I matter, right? In a previous session today, including yourself at work, I shared a story of how I had a manager once sit down and say, okay, you're here, now what's next? Initially, I thought, oh my God, I'm getting fired, I'm doing a horrible job. No, that was the very first time I ever had a manager say, I wanna know what's next. And I wanna make sure that I am preparing you now for what's next, that you're building, that you're developing. Wow, I've been working 10 years before anybody said what's now and what's next, right? So the very first time being seen, it matters, and it's important to help managers lead authentically by seeing your team. Love it. Thank you both. Okay, as we move forward, let's see what we have next. Ben, I want to start with you this time. How can managers leverage emotional intelligence to help their staff thrive? Whew, take a breath on this one.
Well, I would love in a chat anyone to put what their thoughts on emotional intelligence are, their definitions of it, what comes to mind, an association, a feeling, a word, a color, just drop in anything in the chat right now. When I say emotional intelligence, what's our kind of base understanding? There's not right or wrong here, but we'll have those come in. And, someone, AG just put in, self-awareness and relationship management. Right? So that's a great start there. More self-awareness, ability to comprehend emotions, self-awareness leading with humanity, compassion, caring, soft skills, empathy, humility, understanding how to control, ability to tap into the best, right, of you and your coworkers. So oftentimes we talk about IQ. You think someone's IQ score, there's sort of this raw intelligence, which has bias in IQ scores as well, which is a whole separate conversation we could have. But EQ, the quote I once heard is, it's not how smart you are, it's how are you smart. EQ is a form of smarts around how we connect with ourselves and with others. And it's hard to have EQ if we don't have a good relationship with ourselves and know that's the self-awareness that so many of you spoke about. And as Zara said, the soft skills. And so the challenge is that, we might see on Teams or Zoom or Slack or the other tools that we use, when we used to sit in cubicles in an office, right? We didn't necessarily know that, you've got, I don't know, an elder person living in your home that you take care of. We didn't know that, your dog was in a cast or a cone because of a surgery, or your cat. We didn't know that there was construction, or that, your neighbors were loud, or that little kids may be running around. And so part of that is just to pay attention, right? And I think to ask, and, that's a part of, right now you think of, we have parents, and then we're out of the nest usually, and then we're all sort of on our own. And, people really look to managers as leaders and figureheads, even in their lives, to be grounded, for someone to care for them. And so part of that is paying attention to the whole person, because if I have someone who's just a product manager, or just a finance person, or just a salesperson, and I only talk to them about those things, about their performance, they're not going to necessarily know that I care about them as a person. But when they know that I care about what happened this weekend, or a thing that they're struggling with or dealing with, to even pay attention to an emotion, hey, it seems like, your energy's down today. Is that true? And could you tell me a little bit more about what's going on? Or, hey, usually you're this way, or I noticed this thing. That's paying attention, right? So I think a lot of emotional intelligence is paying attention, even with yourself, to say, hey, I'm noticing I'm getting really irritated right now. I need to slow down a second and, think about what's going on with me, or here's why this is irritating me, because it may have nothing to do. They may have just stepped on something, a tripwire inside of your emotional wiring. So Azure, that's how I start to think about emotional intelligence.
Love it. So as managers, we're asking ourselves, I'm noticing this about me. So owning, being self-aware, right? And then more importantly, leaning into your team members and employees. Hey, I'm curious about this. I love it. Seeing the humanness of people and their lives. Zara, what do you think? How can managers leverage EQ?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to plus one what Michelle put in the chat. Literally every meeting I start, I have a check-in question for folks, right? And it could be as silly as like, what's your favorite scent? It could be, what are you going to be for Halloween that's coming up, right? But again, that's cultural context, right? We have some folks that are global that don't celebrate Halloween. So it's really like figuring out the group of individuals there and how you can break the ice in a way, in a fun way, for people to kind of get to know one another. There's no reason why we can't like bake in those moments of connection into meetings, right? So I think that's really what DEIB work is all about. It's this emotional intelligence. It's how do we really connect with one another, right? It's that human aspect. And so I know I started mentioning this earlier, but we know that management expectations, they look really different now, right? So people are not only seeking to be able to bring aspects of their whole self, they're also looking for their leaders to model what that looks like, right? So I was mentioning right before this about psychological safety, and I cannot, highlight that enough. Psychological safety is really something that's, created for folks from the leadership level, right? And so people are not going to feel psychologically safe if they're seeing their leaders behave in certain ways that are now setting the expectation that I can't be myself, or I can't bring aspects of myself, right? So managers are now being asked to be vulnerable, right? That's where that emotional intelligence comes in. That vulnerability is such a superpower. And I think people are starting to really recognize that in the space, especially from the management and leadership levels, right? And we've been often conditioned to think that being vulnerable is a weakness, but the reality is it's not, because you're showing your employees, you're showing your, people that you manage that this is what human is, right? This is what it looks like. And so when you do that, you then almost normalize other people being able to do that, right? And so cannot stress enough how important it is for management, for leaders to be really vulnerable. And so I just want to share an example here of a company that we partner with. There was a neurodivergent leader at the company C-suite, and on an org-wide call, they disclosed that they're taking prescription medicine to help support his health, right? And that had an amazing, so first of all, of course, the fact that they felt safe enough to be able to even share this, right? Not everyone can do that. But when they did that, it actually sparked amazing conversations across the company of people talking about what kind of support they need in the workplace. And it was simply because a leader felt safe enough to be vulnerable, to kind of share, something that's supporting him. And so again, the fact that you can do that and model that as a leader, it had a very real impact on the rest of folks. So again, thinking about how as managers, as leaders, we are showing up and leading with that vulnerability.
Oh, that is loaded. It's heavy, it's weighty, but it's wonderful, right? It's a wonderful weight when managers choose to lead with that vulnerability, right? Brene Brown talks about how courageous you must be in order to do that, right? Thinking about your scenario, I remember having a manager years ago, and in our one-on-ones, I was used to checking in. He said, I don't check in on females. I was taught, I was trained, I don't ask how you're doing. It's inappropriate, it crosses a boundary. And for me, that was a big wall. I'm not asking you to be nosy. I'm just asking you to be curious. That's how my weekend is. Ask how my spouse, where did I go on vacation, right? And that was a very uncomfortable interaction. However, when I became a manager in that same organization, I had a team member that loved to couch surf, had never heard of it a day in my life. He had a book bag. He would couch surf across the US. And when he would come back to work, I would say, okay, whose couch did you sleep on this weekend? Like, it was just a real thing. But seeing that I was curious about his life allowed him to give so much more to the environment. Just taking that little bit of interest in our team matters. Let's see what we want to know next. I think, Zara, I'm going to start with you this time. What are some ways managers can make sure they're practicing self-care and maintaining high levels of well-being? Wow, we matter, we care. How? And what does it look like? Can you help us?
Yes, I'm so happy to share some pointers. And the reality is, right, we often talk about, especially like being a woman of color, right? I've always been conditioned to like take care of others, put others before me. But the reality is, if I'm not at 100%, how can I possibly help others be at 100%, right? And so that's really what it comes down to when we're thinking about managers. It's not just focusing on how you show up for others. How are you showing up for yourself first, right? When you show up for yourself, now you're able to support other people. But again, back to that modeling aspect, now you're showing others how they can show up for themselves as well, right? So people are looking to their managers to set the tone of like what's normalized. If you're having an off day, and someone even said this, right? Like no one wants to hear their manager whine, but I think there's a difference between being vulnerable and sharing when you're really struggling versus when you're whining, right? And also, who are you sharing this information with? So for instance, if you're having an off day, sharing that with your team, being like, look, I'm actually having an off day today. I'm gonna log off for a few hours, right? I'm gonna go for a walk. Now you're allowing your team to see you as a human, but also when they're having a bad day, now they know it's okay for them to go for a quick walk, right? And so again, it looks like a lot of different things, but managers being able to get a sense of what you need, right? As a human being, as an individual in this moment, and doing that and letting folks know, hey, this is what I'm doing to take care of myself. Again, modeling that for other folks, right? That honesty, being candid, it goes a long way to develop that psychological safety that we were talking about. And I also just want to name, like, this is in many ways a new world for people to navigate, right? And so we want to make sure that we are equipping managers with the education, the information that they really need to succeed in these areas, especially for folks that maybe are not used to that, right? Maybe they're not comfortable with being vulnerable, or maybe they're not comfortable with like sharing when they're struggling, right? So again, making sure that we're equipping people with this knowledge so that they can succeed, right? It's a well-known fact that people don't leave a company, they leave managers, right? So while we're focusing on really building up a DEIB focus like workplace and focusing on developing our employees, let's also not neglect focusing on the people that are going to be managing those employees, right? So let's make sure we're really focusing on manager growth as well. And, just to give another example, because I'm a big believer in examples, even on my own team, we have some folks who are parents, right? And so they'll put on their calendar, hey, I'm doing, instead of just saying do not book, because people were still booking over that, they actually just say school drop off, school pick up. And so now people are not booking over those times because it's obvious that that person cannot join at this time. So again, it needed to come from a place of people feeling comfortable enough to do that. But that's the type of thing that's going to go a long way for people to feel safe and to be vulnerable. And I'm not just talking about employees, right? Managers are doing this as well. So that's what we're really looking for, that sort of, mirroring what does it look like to be able to like focus on yourself, right? And letting other people know that.
Got it, Ben, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, plus one to all of that. And I think it's the practical example around the calendar block and just being explicit of what it is. It's not just, oh, I'm using this time to go through my email box. It's like I'm picking up my kid at the bus stop and they're 6 years old and I can't leave them on the curb, right? It's a very reasonable thing to set a boundary around. One of the most important things a manager can practice in terms of demonstrating this, how do they take time off? How do they take time off? If they're off, if they're on holiday, they're in Cancun, they're in, Phoenix, they're wherever they do their holiday, and they're on email all the time, they're making phone calls, they're on text, they're on Slack. What does that communicate to everybody else? That when you're off, you're not really off. Or when they have a thing where they say, I can't make it, and then they show up anyway, or they just check in. And oftentimes it's the impulse to be helpful or to be there, but often that's rooted in sort of control and anxiety and a bunch of things. Model what you're able to do or not able to do is what other people will pick up on. If you say, I'm getting, I need to go get, a medical procedure done. I need to get my colonoscopy, my mammogram. I need to get my annual physical. I need to go to my therapy appointment. I need to, whatever the thing is, right? I need to go to my dialysis, whatever, you don't have to disclose it. You could just say you have a medical appointment, a personal appointment, but I have things I need to take care of for myself that are really important. That's a part of modeling that, or a dependent or a loved one that you need to help do those things with as well, is a really critical part. And also, I remember when I was early in my career, I was at a large company and we had a bunch of executives talk and they were talking about their careers. And one of them joked, thank God for Kodak, or I wouldn't know what my kids look like. Ooh, all of us were like, we don't want to work here. And we were new. And this was one of the 10 best places to get a job after college. Business Week does a list every year. One of the top 10 places to start your career. And that was what they were saying, is they're missing out on being a parent. Asher, back to you.
Love it. Wow. And what about the person who didn't even have children? They knew what they were looking forward to.
Right.
Let's keep moving forward. Thanks, Ben. Ben, for this next one, I want to start right with you. How can managers and leadership read the room and create authentic connections, even when they're not actually in the room? What's that look like for you?
So often a manager or leader will come in, sometimes they come in late, they come in unprepared, they come in hot, they come in anxious, and we don't slow down to clarify what's the goal and what's my role. And that can help really define, check in, how's everyone doing? I had one leader I saw said, everyone, I want to put, are you red, yellow, or green today as a person? And they've stopped the meeting. If you're red, what can we do to help you get to yellow or to be present here? And that's a part of reading. It's asking, it's looking around. We haven't heard from this person who's in the meeting. Either they probably shouldn't be there or something else is going on. So if they should be there, hey, like gesturing to them, I'd like to hear your thoughts. I know you have a lot of experience in this. And also to set the operating principles and the tone for how you run a meeting, how you treat other people. Imagine the question came earlier about what's the B in belonging. Imagine if Zara and I were like, oh, can't believe someone's asking this. little thing, or for those of you that don't know, instead we're celebrating. Great question. Other people want to know that too. Thanks for asking it. That's the psychological safety that Zara's talking about. So that's also part of reading the room. Or if people feel really stressed and you're just pushing through that agenda, you may stop and say, hey, it seems like there's a lot of like resistance or confusion going on. Let's talk about that a little bit. So there's an agility. We often try to run the play, which means barreling through the slide deck, jamming through the agenda. And part of reading the room is paying attention. Azure?
Yes. Zara, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, +1 to everything Ben said. I also think that connection piece is really important, right? That's like one of the #1 questions I get from companies right now is like, how do we build a sense of belonging, right? How do we, and it's like, you have to intentionally build in moments of connection, right? So that check-in question we were talking about, that's an easy moment of connection, but it's quick, right? So what are the other types of spaces that we're building to really highlight connection? Because you can't talk about a room and talk about reading the room without talking about connection, right? This is that very human aspect that informs the room, right? So also thinking about who's in the room and who's not in the room, right? And how are we making sure that voices of those folks that are not in the room are still helping inform this conversation, right? So there's a lot to talk about there. I could go on and on about that, but I really do think it's important to know what your folks think, how they're feeling, right? Creating connection spaces, and really being able to use that to help inform how you're approaching a room.
Love it. I just threw in the chat, how do you do it? What do you currently do now to read the room? Take a minute and put that in the chat. Ben, that's my next audiobook on standby, 4,000 Weeks. Wonderful read. I've heard amazing things about it. Ways to create authentic connection, so important. I have one more question for our panelists. For this one, Zara, I'm going to start with you. What are 3 priorities that all managers must keep in mind when thinking about employee development?
Yeah. So quickly, the 3 things. First, communication is key, right? No one's a mind reader, making sure that we're not operating off assumptions, we're actually talking to people, right? Second, that personalization piece, recognizing that management is not a one size fits all. People want different things. And that actually feeds into the 3rd piece here, which is also creativity when it comes to management, right? So recognizing that some people want to move up in their role, some people want to get further education, some people want a mentor, right? Development looks different for every person. And some people, also to be very clear, don't want to move anywhere. They want to stay in their role and just grow within their role. And that is still someone that we should be focusing on developing. So those are my 3 pieces: communication, personalization, and creativity.
Love it. Development looks different. Ben, what about you?
I'll add 3 more: prioritize, simplify, and share. So prioritize, we tend to prioritize supervision. You do this, you do that, this is due this time, right? That field marshal coordinator with the clipboard in your hand. It's important, you got to supervise. But the more you supervise, the more you have to supervise. The more you develop, the less you have to supervise. Managers like it when they supervise less. Employees like being supervised less. So prioritize development. Number 2, simplify. If you have an 8-page development document, 6 goals, 18-point leadership model, whew, we're a big fan of a single development objective. Work on one at a time. What's the one thing Azure's working on to be Azure 2.0? What's the one thing Ben's working on to be Ben 2.0? What's the one thing Zara's working on to be Zara 2.0? Simplify it. Then you don't need giant systems and processes. Third thing, share the responsibility. Share the participation. The employee's got to own some of it. You can't just be mama bird chewing up the worm and spitting in baby bird's mouth, right? You want that bird to fly. So you got to work on that together. And they're going to take actions. You're going to take actions. Share with other managers, with other colleagues, have peers work with each other. You know, oh, you want more feedback? Well, I'm happy to give you feedback, but I'd encourage you in addition to go talk to our clients, to go talk to your cross-departmental person. So that's sharing the responsibility. So prioritize, simplify, and share.
Love it. And simplified. One thing, Keller Williams. What's your one thing? You showing up? Let's focus on that. Let's get that thing done. Wonderful. Ben, I'm going to turn as we move forward. Can you give us some community ideas, community resource ideas?
So what we want to do just really quickly is spend about 2 minutes, and we'd love to have everyone participate in the chat. A lot of you dropped some of these in already, but the question is, you know, what are some unique virtual management, situations that you've experienced? And so, and this could be a tip or a challenge or something. We'll gather some of these together, but what are some of those? So if you drop those in, we're going to help send those out to everybody else. So it may be you figured out a way. Some people talked about opening up a meeting. What'd you do this weekend? Or, we had a thing Taylor led with us at our company this week. We started drawing, and we had a whole drawing exercise, and boy, were people out of their comfort zones, and also had a ton of fun. We did Pictionary sort of at scale, right? And it was 5 minutes, but it really warmed things up. The red, yellow, green I talked about earlier. So we can keep those coming in the chat. Azure, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so now's an opportunity for you to pull out your phone and scan away. I'm sure your phone is somewhere near you.
I love it. And I can speak to this, Azure, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So PowerToFly puts on an executive forum every month currently, and it focuses on different topics, right? And so we put together a report after each executive forum. So in this executive forum, we welcome, C-suite and leadership of different companies to participate in a conversation. So in March, we actually had a conversation about DEIB in the global workplace, because again, a lot of companies are now shifting to a more global workforce. And so really kind of talked about things that we should be keeping in mind when we're working with a global workforce. So the QR code that you see here will take you to a link where you can actually download that report. So I welcome everyone to do that. Again, these conversations are never ending, but it's a great starting point for, especially if you're questioning, how do I really work and navigate a global workplace?
All right, as we continue to move forward,
I will just continue talking. Thank you, Azure. So hello, folks. If you joined late, my name is Zara. I'm the Global DEIB Impact Manager at PowerToFly. And so just a little bit about us very quickly. Again, if you go to the report on the previous slide, it will take you to our website. And so we are really focused on how do we elevate DEIB within companies, right? And so that includes a variety of different things. It includes talent acquisition, it includes retention services, right? The team that I sit on, the DEIB team, very much focuses on the retention side of things, but we partner with so many different companies globally to ensure that they are able to not only hire diverse folks that they're looking for, right, within their company, but also to really continue to grow them, right, and retain them. And we support them in that. And we're very much about elevating underrepresented talent and really getting money into their pockets, because that's how change happens, right? So getting them those jobs, but also focusing on how do we continue to develop them with DEIB services.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zara. As we move forward, here's another opportunity for you to take your phone. Please scan the code. Ben, I want to turn this to you for a second.
So, Pilot, much like PowerToFly, we're all about empowering HR leaders to create great workplaces. I thought about it actually this morning, PowerToFly and Pilot, what a great brand pairing, I was like, why didn't this click to me sooner? But we have this ebook for you, great ebook, Unlock a Thriving Employee Experience Through Your Managers. So often we think about employee experience, we think about the kombucha fountain or the perk we give, or that there's a wellness day. But, when people at the dinner table get asked, hey, honey, hey, roommate, hey, friend, how was work? About 80% of the answer to that comes from the manager relationship. So, Zara said earlier, people join organizations, they leave managers. So employee experience, we really think at the root of it is the manager. It's not the perks or the software, or your intranet, those things. Those are on the edges of what a job experience is like. So we've got a great ebook. We've got the link in the chat. If you're not a QR code person, you're sick of going to restaurants and doing that. Okay, if you are, you're like, oh, I love a QR code. Great. Just click on the link in the chat. Let's go to the next slide. And then quickly on Pilot, I'll just tell you, we have an employee development program. That's what Pilot is. And it's turnkey. Many of you said in the poll earlier, you're just getting started, or you wish you could get it to more people, or it was too expensive, or how do we have it be relevant to more folks? A lot of those pain points we hear from a lot of folks. And so we've got a program that's easy to implement in about 2 weeks. It's affordable. So from an inclusion perspective, you can give it to people below senior ranks, maybe people that are individual contributors, give people a shot. And it's proven scalable. We just won Supplier of the Year from Diageo, one of our customers, and a top HR product. And, it involves, group coaching where people get to talk together and work together, employee reflection, people get to look in the mirror at themselves, if you will, and get that EQ, the self-awareness we talked about, the community aspect, the belonging we've talked about, and then executives modeling the vulnerability. That's a key part that we bring in as well, the psychological safety. And then managers having the development chats about the future, the thinking about the future and where things could go. So, what we've done is to try to democratize a top of the house leadership development program that if you've ever worked for a big company, there's often a thing, a university, an institute, and executive education was great if you got to the top 2 or 3% of roles in the company. But if you're in the other 97%, you typically didn't get much. And where pilot we're trying to do is get that to people that may not be able to fly to headquarters. They may not be able to, for a lot of different reasons. We blend it in the flow of work. So we'd love to talk to you more about pilot if development's on your agenda for 2023.
Thanks for sharing, Ben. As we move forward, if you have questions, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to put them in the chat now. We are still doing an amazing job on time, but I would love to get to this next poll and then come back to the questions. Can we pivot a little bit and do that? Wonderful. So Taylor, okay, we have 47 people on. We're going to launch this poll, which means you will have less than 45 seconds to get those answers in. So Taylor, over to you.
Poll is launched, folks. We're asking, are you currently planning a new employee development program? The sun is fully attacking me. Go ahead and vote right now. I don't look great in this lighting, I have to say.
Maybe my analogy of feeling the sun is just now broken down. All analogies break down at a certain point, and it broke down within the 60-minute webinar. Oh my goodness.
Let the sun shine in. All right, we're 50%
Exactly.
there.
Almost there.
Yes.
All right.
Great.
Let's get a couple more folks participating here. Keep my eye on the chat.
See if we can get to 75%.
Great.
Let's do it.
AG's got a question. Everyone drop more questions because Zara and I are going to do a rapid round of getting through, a bunch of questions. So
Yep.
load us up. Get more than your money's worth here. Right? Like if I said last call at a bar, you know what you'd do? You'd be going to the bar. The buffet's shutting down, the breakfast buffet, you'd be going for that last piece of bacon and those strawberries or whatever your pleasure is.
Okay, Taylor, I think we should go ahead, end the poll and share it with what we have.
All right, we can see the results this time, right?
Yes.
All right, great. So we've got 48% say no plans in the near future. 28% of folks say I expect to start planning in the next 6 months to 1 year. Good runway there. And then 24% said, yes, I've already started planning. Woo! All right. Ben, Zara,
Let's find out
anything
our
you wanna
second.
add? Oh, okay, let's do it. Question 4. Launched. All right. Would you like to learn more about Pilot or PowerToFly? I should see 100% on both of these here.
PowerToFly's got some very groovy technology and a lot of innovation and a groovy brand, I must say. So, well, as the polls are coming in, I saw AG put a question and it says, how are expectations for employees raised? AG, personal point of view on this, and Zara, I'd love to hear yours, is just that, there's a lot that going to an office, as much as it's a pain, there's also, you run into people, relationships in the elevator, the parking lot, the cafeteria, the conference room, you belong. If people see you're overworked and struggling, they might stop by. It's easier to often get things done, right? The relationships are there. So when you're often out of sight, you're out of mind. So employees need to upward manage. They need to be more visible. They need to develop and invest in those relationships. They need to decide flexibility is a two-way street. No one's really talking about this, but when do they need to make some personal sacrifices to be there for employees, at a fellow colleagues, at an important meeting, at an offsite, it's a training, something like that. So Zara, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is also like personal. And so what the pressure that people feel personally, because again, it's like, oh, I wonder if my manager is going to be wondering where I am. But on the flip side of that, it also goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is micromanagers, right? And so again, for a lot of folks, like there are companies that started instituting wild policies like, oh, you have to have your camera on all day, right? If you're working from home, things like that, right? And so expectations can be risen because it looks a little bit different in terms of what the work is that people are expecting to be produced. And back to Ben's point, like when you're in the office, like you give yourself some time in between meetings, you got to walk there, right? You make sure you build in lunch. When you're behind a computer, sometimes people are just looking at your calendar and are like back to back to back meetings. So it's almost like the expectation of the amount of work that you can do is risen now, because that human aspect of just connecting with people or being in an office or commuting and all of that, that's taken out of the picture, because now it's like, well, you should be available 24/7. So that's just something that I've seen shift for some folks.
The Economist did some research in 2020 when we had the baptism by fire for remote work, and they found that salaried employees were working 2 hours more per day, 2 hours more per day than they did before, but their output was the same. So more effort for the same output means inefficiency, lower productivity. And so that's also part of how do you organize your workspace? How do you create boundaries with the people and animals you live with, right? So you can focus. How do you set the time so you can pick a kid up from the bus stop or get lunch or use the restroom or, go get some fresh air, some sunlight in the winter months, really important, unless you're Taylor on the webinar and then it's, the vampire, look, get away from all this sunlight or whatever the right analogy is. So really important things.
Yeah. So Taylor, if you can go to our very last slide, Zara, I'm going to allow you the opportunity to go in and pick one of those questions and see if you can take us home with that last one. Any question in the chat that was so profound that you just wanted to speak on before we close, while we give Zara an opportunity to do that. Remember, please pull out your phone, scan the QR code for both Pilot and PowerToFly. The information will also be shared via chat. Zara, were you able to find one that you loved?
I don't know how many questions actually came in via the chat. I feel like people had a lot of comments and we definitely pulled those in. But I think, the question that Ben was kind of speaking to was really the only question that I saw come through in the chat. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I think there was a lot of good stuff we spoke about, and I just encourage people to continue doing your own education around topics like psychological safety and how we build that as managers.
Love it. Well, on behalf of this amazing team, we want to say thank you. Ben, are there any parting words for our team?
Do something. Going to webinars is great. Getting energized by someone as inspiring as Azure and Zara, and maybe someone as lackluster as me, is great. Taylor as well, right? Dream team here you got. But you got to put insights into action. You may have learned something. This may reinforce what you've already known. This may have inspired you if you felt a little defeated. Wherever you're at, the difference is in action, right? That's my coaching background. So keep it simple, right? You may not be able to reach every employee in your company with development, with stay interviews, with a leadership program, with a DEIB initiative. But what can you do? Where can you start? So I think oftentimes we get overwhelmed to think we need a 5-year strategy. Your organization may be bought or merge or change. You may get a different career opportunity. Don't worry about 5 years from now. Worry about 5 weeks from now. Worry about 5 days from now. What can you do? What can you do this afternoon? What can you set up? What can you decide? What can you simplify? What can you prioritize? That's the difference, right? That there's the knowing versus doing gap we talk at Pilot about. We all know to do a lot of things. We know to sleep 7 hours, we know to have an agenda for a meeting. We know to, recap things. We know to use the project management system, but the difference is, do we do it?
Yes,
so there's a lot of you throwing LinkedIn links in there. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Let's stay connected. Zara, last words from you. I'd love to hear. You can close this out. Any last wisdom, donut recipes, tips about great Manhattan restaurants.
Never Manhattan. I'll talk about Brooklyn restaurants all day. No, I was just going to say, I think there's a lot of conversation that's constantly happening when we talk about DEIB. And I think we want to make sure that when we're talking about employee development program, we're looking at it from a lens of DEIB, right? Because that includes employee development as well. So I just want to encourage you, again, continue the educational pieces. Like Ben said, coming to webinars is awesome as a means of kind of opening your minds to different ways of thinking and different strategies. But what are you then going to do about it, right? And that's where that communication piece comes in. Like, know your people, right? So make sure you build the spaces to actually have these conversations to find out what do they want to develop, how do they want to develop, etc. So again, never assume. That's just going to be my final word.
We love it. Thank you so very much for being here today. It has been a pleasure. Go do something. Thank you on behalf of Ben, Zara, Taylor, and myself, Azure. Go do something. Take care, everyone.